and happy Friday, YouTube family. Welcome to the first episode of Friday Morning Financials with Nina, where I break down key money management tips to help you create financial freedom and endless Fridays. I'm your host, Nina, and today we're diving into what I'd like to call the foundation of your financial house, an emergency fund. But first, let's start with a quick stat from MSN.com. It says that 54% of Americans have at least 3 months of emergency savings, according to data collected by the Federal Reserve in 2023. Considering the economic times, I'd say that's pretty good. But on the flip side, that means that 46% of Americans have little or no savings for emergencies at all. Are you in the 54% or are you in the 46%? Either way, today's episode will help you check in or get started on your emergency fund. So grab your tea, sit back, and let's get financially savvy. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you enjoy the show. If you have questions on this episode, feel free to drop them in the comments as well. Then tune in for the next episode to hear me address your question. Now let's get started. So first, why do you need an emergency fund? Several reasons. Many things in life could happen. One thing that I would say is that one of the biggest reasons for having an emergency fund is that it prevents you from dipping into your 401k. Now, some people are okay with doing that. I am not one of those people. I firmly believe that your 401k is going to have to be one of the biggest nest eggs for your retirement. So, tapping into it as well as potentially getting a hefty tax penalty does not make dipping into your 401k to pay for emergencies a feasible option for you. So that's number one. Now, then you start talking about life events. So, why would you need an emergency fund? Well, what happens if you lose your job tomorrow? Typically, it takes an American 6 months to find a new job if they do lose their job. So, what will you do with 6 months of no income? Do you have a plan B? Who knows? Well, if you don't, then emergency fund will come in handy. Also, so what happens if you get sick and you have to go to urgent care? Well, I'm giving you a few numbers here just to help you wrap your mind around what type of dollars and costs will contribute to a substantial or necessary emergency fund. So if you go to the emergency room or if you go to an emergency visit, you're talking about, on average, just for an emergency room visit, I'm giving you worst case scenario. You're talking about around $1,400 just for one emergency visit. Do you have that money readily available if you have to go to the emergency room tonight or tomorrow? So that becomes the question. Again, just giving you numbers so you can try to relate to how the emergency fund will benefit you in the long run. Now, another thing could be a car repair. Depending on the type of car you have, or depending on if you need one tire or all tires, you might be talking about an expense of $400 up to $1,500 in tire repair. And just think about some of these things, right? So, have you ever had to replace a tire? Have you ever had to go to urgent care? Have you ever lost your job? What did that cost impact have on you? So, I mean, you can also use that as an example as well to give you an idea of how much money you may need in case that happens again, right? Another thing, if you are a homeowner, appliance repair, that is another unexpected expense. If the dryer goes out, dishwasher goes out, refrigerator goes out, you most likely will have to pay just a fee to get a repairman to come in and evaluate the problem. Last repair I had in my home was for $250 to fix the dryer. Again, just an example. Are you prepared for that? And then lastly, I'm just going to categorize the other, right? So my other would be my dog, for example. Unexpected expenses with my dog. The last dog that I had, I spent $2,000 plus on just a vet emergency visit. So, do you have the funds to pay for that? Is it a priority? I encourage you to think about other areas in life where potential emergencies could come up. Is it for your kids? Is it for your parents? Again, just trying to provoke thought here. Moving on. All right, so how do we actually build an emergency fund? What I'm going to do today is just highlight the milestones that I am proposing that you take on for building up an emergency fund. That first milestone is what I like to call the very first step, or the first emergency fund milestone. That is building up a savings or a fund of $1,000. So if you think about the examples of emergencies that I just showed, $1,000 can cover some of those costs, and actually $1,000 may not cover other costs, right? So this is just a good foundation, a good first step to say, you know what, I am building a solid emergency fund. And honestly, some people might say $1,000 is a lot. Some people might say $1,000 isn't. But again, if you look at the numbers that I just showed you, $1,000 can make or break you in a stressful situation, and come in handy if you don't have the immediate funds to cover an emergency cost. So either way, start off with 1,000. The next step, or final step for some people. So there are some recommendations of 4 to 6 months for an emergency fund. My recommendation is 6. And why do I recommend 6? I recommend 6 because on average, again, I'm going to repeat that. On average, for Americans, if you are laid off or lose your job, it could take you up to 6 months to find a new job. So I would rather you be mentally at ease and have 6 months versus 4 months of savings regarding losing your job. So if you have 6 months, I believe that is an efficient amount of time to find a new job and not be stressed. So that is the key with an emergency fund. It is there to help you as a cushion and be a buffer for things that are outside of your budget and to ease the stress. This is what I am calling for step 2, or again, maybe a final for some, but a necessary emergency fund milestone. So this is my absolute bare minimum on where you should be to be in a good spot in your financial house with an emergency fund. Now, lastly, if you want to go above and beyond, this is what I would consider your best case emergency fund scenario, okay? That would be 8 months plus of your total income and savings. So if you have 8 months plus, you got an even better cushion. And who knows, in the 6 months that, for example, you lose your job, other emergencies can happen. You never know. So is that enough to cover emergencies as well as you looking for a job? All of that comes into play, And again, I'm going to say here, best case scenario, if you are able to push your budget even further to get 8+ months in your emergency fund, I definitely would recommend that. Is it necessary? No. Will it get you in a better financial scenario? Absolutely. But that is up to you to evaluate what your situation is and does it make sense to do more than 6 months in an emergency fund. All right, so moving on here. So just some general tips on how do you generate, how do you build up an emergency fund? What are the steps that you actually take? So I would suggest that your funds should be in a savings or high yield savings account. And the reason is so that you can have easy access and it will be quick for you to withdraw the funds if needed. So easy access, that's the key for emergencies. You need that money quick. Secondly, so these funds should be dedicated only for emergency use only. So you have other accounts that are dedicated to like 401k, for example, not a fund that you want to dip in ideally for emergencies. So hands off of that fund. You may have an educational fund. You may have a travel fund. These are all funds that you're working towards and they are separate. So those are the savings accounts that are generally incorporated into your monthly budget. We're going to leave those alone. Okay. And then thirdly, building up an emergency fund, that needs to be your highest priority. So if you do not have $1,000 for an emergency fund today, that needs to be your first priority. And then also, if you are not at the 6 months of your income and savings for an emergency fund, that also needs to be a priority. So I have always worked towards the present and the tomorrow to make sure that is covered. And then once I got to a place where I had a substantial emergency fund, then I started focusing on budgeting and saving for the other areas in life that, were important to me and I needed funds for to meet goals. All right. And then fourthly, so when you have used funds for emergencies, you have to be sure to revisit your plan. So you have to make a plan to replenish your funds. That's something that I think some people don't think about. So for example, if you had $10,000 and then you had to spend, I'll just say two on tires for your car, then you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, $8,000 is still a lot, but you may need 10. You may need 10 in 2 months. So it's very important to revisit and make sure that you replenish what you have used. That should always be a priority, which is why it is important to look at your funds monthly. And we'll talk about that in another episode regarding budgeting. So, and then lastly, so reevaluating your emergency fund annually at minimum. That is something that I would suggest. Life changes, you have kids, you have new goals, you have new expenses. It's definitely a good thing to say, okay, annually I'm going to sit down and figure out if 6 months of my income and savings is adequate for an emergency fund, or who knows, maybe you're at a point now where you said 8 months is definitely necessary. So that is something that I would encourage you guys to do as well. Now, again, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments section and I will answer them on the next episode. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Friday Morning Financials with Nina. I hope you found today's discussion on the foundation of your financial house and emergency fund insightful and inspiring. Remember, financial freedom is definitely within your reach, and every small step you take brings you closer to your goals. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps me continue to bring valuable financial insights every week. And don't forget to check out the rest of my YouTube channel, Endless Fridays, where we also share travel tips and inspiration to help you live like every day is Friday. Don't forget to tune in next week at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our episode on building a solid budget. It's an episode you won't want to miss. Until then, stay financially savvy and have a fantastic weekend. Don't forget to tune in to next week at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our new episode on building a solid budget. It's an episode you will not want to miss. Until then, stay financially savvy and in have a finan. Okay, I gotta pause that.